Hi, I'm Etta Spencer. Today, let's go to the Middle East. It's not exactly my favorite place in the world. This is full of extraordinary conflicts, and I don't spend much time hanging out there, but it's certainly important if anybody wants to understand the current status of the world and the threats that we all face. So, I have some experts here, some people who have differing backgrounds, different interests. I'm going to introduce first Paul Meyer. Paul is a former Canadian ambassador for disarmament and has been working since his retirement from that position. He goes a lot to the United Nations and is especially, I think, working on trying to create a treaty or some other instrument to minimize the risk of cyber war or cyber conflicts. Mayor Amor is a longtime friend and colleague. He's also a sociologist, retired from Concordia University, and he's of Israeli background. He has, in the last 4 or 5 years, returned to Israel since his retirement from professing. And of course, he has a background himself in having refused to serve in combating kinds of oppression that he thought that the Israeli army should not be engaged in doing. So he took a stand even before he came to Canada, and that's what kind of drew me to him. He was, for a couple of years at least, on the editorial board of Peace Magazine. So it's always great to be back in touch with Mayor. And in Washington, D.C., I want everybody to meet a new friend, Mariam Nayab Yazdi. Mariam is a human rights activist who has been, she's Canadian as well as Iranian. I think you came to North America as a small child from Iran. Is that right, Mariam?
Sorry, yeah, I was 5 when I came, 1989.
Okay.
Yeah, end of the Iran-Iraq War.
And she has a degree from York University in Canada, but for the last several years has been living in Washington, D.C. She has created a civil society organization, building seed for a new era of social change. Jill Carr Harris, who is a very dear friend, who is, I think, likely to become my successor in chairing Project Save the World. And so more and more, she's sitting in on the shows that I produce, the forums, and serving as something of a co-host. She's a Canadian who has lived in India for the past 40 years and has been working as a Gandhian organizer there with her husband, Raja Gopal. So she has a lot of experience with nonviolence. So let me, Mayor, I think maybe you're the best person to start us off by giving a kind of a capsule synopsis of the events of the last 6 months or so, having to do with the attack on the attack on Israel on October the 7th, and then the succeeding retribution imposed by Israel on Gaza. And then, was it only a couple of weeks ago, I guess, the attack by Israel and, Israel had already been bombing Iran, but it was joined by the United States with the major bombing. Give us a snapshot, if you can, a couple of minutes.
Well, I'll try. I'll try to give you a snapshot. It's 2 years, almost 2 years. October, it will be 2 years. October 7th to 2023, there was an attack by warriors or the Hamas soldiers on Israeli settlement and towns near Gaza. And it seems that for 24 hours they were able to penetrate in many places. They killed around 1,200 people in one day. uh, um, and many I don't know, reports about what has happened goes on. Some of it true, some of it is not true, but atrocities were committed. And then Israel opened a war against Gaza, and that war is still going on. So we did not finish the war. In that war, and during this time, there were several other wars or engagement or skirmishes, or there was a war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and there was an attack from Iran on Israel. And then in the last month, that is in early June, Israel has decided to attack Iran. And in 12 days, the Israeli Air Force had bombed and destroyed many of the Iranian nuclear facilities and probably part of the Revolutionary Guard power and factories and other such military aims. So this is a very thin snapshot of what has happened in the last 20 months, roughly. But I would like to put this into three kinds of orbits for understanding what's going on, because now it seems that the United States, after it operated with Israel bombing Iran, the United States is fully engaged in what is going on. So let me try and say something about three orbits that I think that we should consider thinking about the situation. So the first one takes me back to Donald Trump's first campaign, when he used to say, "It is China, stupid, it is China." I think that the United States involvement in the Middle East in such a manner that it did not do for the last 22 years is roughly can be situated in its conflict with China, and trying to build a kind of an American-led operation in which India, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, and other countries are involved in presenting an economic challenge to the abilities and the effort that China is putting in building a different kind of economic orbit or economic path through China, Iran, and Central Asia. So this is the first orbit that we have to deal with. The second one is a little bit more concerned with the Middle Eastern issues. And basically, I think that we should look at the consequences of this ongoing conflict, but also some of the realization that are relevant to those consequences. Well, we don't know for sure now, but it seems that about 100,000 Palestinians were killed. Some reports are speaking about 60, 70, but the latest report that I've heard is about 100,000, and about 250 or maybe 300,000 people were wounded. And the destruction of the Gaza area, whether it is Gaza City itself or Rafah or other places, is compared to what has happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay? It is clear that Israel was able to subdue and to some extent break the power of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Lebanon became a kind of a country that now has a government, and that government is trying to control the country itself. Syria had been destroyed completely, and now we have a new regime in Syria who might even join the Abraham Accord which is part of what I first described as the orbit, the geopolitical orbit that the United States is trying to build. This is the second orbit that I spoke about, the consequences of the war, but there are some realization that I think we should have in mind. One of the most important realizations that I have is that if Iran would have nuclear power, and if it claims that it is there to destroy Israel because it wants to protect Palestinians, it seems that there will be no Palestinian, if there will be a war between Iran and Israel in kind, either of nuclear war or whatever it will be, nobody will be able to join to enjoy that victory, especially not Palestinians. It seems that Israel power is so overwhelming that it is a threat, a genocidal threat to what is going on with the Palestinian issue. And that's just a realization that one should have in mind. The third circle, because I don't want to speak too long, the third circle or orbit that I would like you to have in mind when we are discussing those issues are what I call the rejection fronts in Israel and in the Arab countries or neighbors of Israel, whether are Palestinian or others. It seems that we ran the whole show of rejection on both sides. Now we know how rejections looks like. If it will go on in this way, there is a clear devastation of the whole Middle East is promised by this effort. If rejection is on the Israeli side, that is right-wing political parties, some of them racist parties in Israel, would be in government, and on the other side, there will be people like the Hamas or the Hezbollah, or even the Shiite regime in Iran, who are pro
Can I ask, when you talk about rejection, that's a very general term. Are
rejection of peace, rejection of peace, rejection.
Yes, but excuse me, but I think in every case, the nature of the rejection is going to differ. I mean, in no case will they say we reject peace. They will reject certain terms of peace. Isn't that true? And when you say we know what rejection looks like, isn't that going to vary a lot depending on which group you're talking about and which rejection of what policies? So when you say we know what rejection looks like, you are saying that there's some similarity in all of these cases. Is that right?
That's true. What I'm saying is that on the Israeli Jewish side, there is a rejection front that says we don't want Palestinians around, so we will go all the way up to genocide.
Okay.
This is the full rejection front on the Jewish Israeli side. On the other side, or let's say the Hezbollah or the Hamas, they have also their own covenant basically saying we should get rid of the Jews in the Middle East. So this is what I meant, the rejection fronts. And those two sides actually, I don't know if they collaborate, but for at least they talk in the same language that reinforces each side with its own stringent, extra radical approach. So, for example, Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu supplied a lot of resources to the Hamas for the last 17 years. For example, in the last 6 years, Israeli government actually furnished or enabled Qatari money to go to Gaza Strip to the Hamas. So to some extent, those two extreme sides on both sides cooperate, and they do speak the same language, although in different directions.
Okay,
Okay, I'll stop here.
we have a third rejection, the rejection of Iran. And I think we want to ask Miriam to articulate the position of I don't think you represent them, but to say what rejectionism by Iran looks like, and and what you, well, your own take on that.
All right. I think my approach is going to be very different from everyone else. So I'm just going to take a deep breath for a second. First of all, I have to say that my work has led me to the conclusion, which is why I started to build Seed Operations, the nonprofit I started in the first place. I do not believe peace is possible in the current system. So my approach when we talk about the Iranian regime or the Israeli regime or any regime is legitimacy first and foremost.
Mhm.
So when we say Iran, who are we talking about? The people of Iran or the regime? There's a huge difference. So I have to take a deep breath because most discourse in academia does not differentiate between the two. So we have to take a step back and talk about legitimacy first and foremost. So that's where everything begins, with legitimacy. So we need to question the legitimacy of the regime in Iran, and we need to question the legitimacy of the Israeli regime as well. So most conversations around peace and security and give these regimes full agency as if they're legitimately representing their nations. So that's the first illusion that we have to sort of dispel before we can even reach solutions. So that assumption that they're sort of representative of that nation is the problem. So the regime in Iran, there's advocates right now working really hard to get the term gender apartheid codified as a crime against humanity. And to do that, all they want to do is add the word gender to the current definition of apartheid, meaning that what's happening in Iran or Afghanistan, this gender apartheid system relies on the systematic suppression of universal human rights of the nation they're responsible for in order to stay in power. And so when we talk about the Israeli regime, same thing. Like their entire existence relies on the displacement and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So we have to put into question the entire legitimacy of these regimes. And it's not about just their origin story. It's about they actually rely on the active suppression of these people to stay legitimate and to stay in power. So everything I assess about the current political situation has to be through the lens of what do these regimes need to do to maintain the illusion of legitimacy? And then that's when I find out what their motives are. So that's my approach to political analysis in general.
Well, and that's a long haul, a heavy lift, as they say. You're not just trying to find some accommodation between Israel and the Iranian regime, but you want a regime change, obviously.
It's not about regime change. It's about the fact that most of our discourse about creating peace or the problems that are existing is centering the legitimacy and agency of the regimes, and it's completely erasing the agency of the people that are under the rule of these regimes. So, for example, if we gave full agency to the people of Iran, we would have to not ignore the fact that they have been rising up in mass protests, mass uprisings for the past 16 years. And they have completely delegitimized this regime. And they have called for free and fair elections. But the problem, the bigger problem here is, which I've identified in my work, is that there's actually no mechanisms in place within the international institutions, whether it's the UN or anything else, to facilitate free and fair elections within nations who are ruled by dictatorship regimes. So there's actually no way for them to facilitate free and fair elections without the world stopping legitimizing their regime. So if the only reason why Iranians don't have freedom right now is not because the world is not helping them overthrow the regime, it's because the world won't stop legitimizing their regime. The Iranians are rising all the time against their regime, willing to sacrifice their own life to send the world the message: stop talking to the regime and start engaging in dialogue with the true representatives of Iranian civil society. And within every society, there are leaders who stand up for universal human rights principles, democratic principles, but often we ignore them. You know why? Because we live in a world that awards and values force, that awards and values military groups. So the conversation isn't about Hamas versus Israeli regime. It's about a regime that relies on the active displacement and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians to maintain its legitimacy. So that's what we need to be talking about, because it's never okay to bomb babies and children because Hamas did a terrorist attack. We should never even be excusing that. So we have to, first of all, we have to admit that we live in a world that doesn't have any mechanisms to create real change, to bring about peace, to recognize civil society leaders over regimes. Those are the things we need to talk about. And another thing is, we don't actually value universal human rights. We don't believe that every single person in the world deserves them. When we look at instability, we only have instability because we have regimes that are allowed to rule over entire nations by denying them universal human rights. And they're only allowed to do that not because the lack of the will of the people within those nations, but because democratic governments, those who claim to value universal human rights, are fine with those regimes being in power. They're fine with that entire nation being deprived of their universal human rights. And any nation who is deprived of their universal human rights, it's inevitable for them to rise. Eventually, they're going to rise and say, you know what? I want access to my universal human rights. I'm tired of being punished for trying to exercise my God-given rights. And
Okay.
that's when instability happens, when that regime says, hell no, I'm going to crush you for wanting your God-given rights. And that's how we get refugees, that's how we get wars, and that's how we perpetuate the cycle of violence, by not recognizing that they don't have legitimacy to begin with. The people do.
I agree with you. And I betcha if we talk to everybody already on this panel, and most of the people who would like to be watching us, they would basically agree with you too. But that does not mean necessarily that they would agree that this is the step one to in the current situation, because what may be necessary in the midst of this particular crisis may be something different from what you want as a long-term or longer-term goal. So I think, Paul, I'm going to be quiet now. I don't want to talk too much. It's not my role. But you have not spoken yet, and I think you can speak to both of the previous panelists about this.
Yes, well, just picking up on this theme of legitimacy, I mean, it also applies in our international system, which is a system of sovereign states. And that has certain limitations, but it's been the basis for formulating international law, which in turn defines which actions are legal and legitimate. And here I confine myself to the most recent, action by Israel and the United States against Iran. I think by any solid interpretation of the UN Charter, and particularly its Articles 2 on peaceful settlement of disputes and Article 51 on self-defense, would find fault with those actions and the justifications that have been purported to be put forward. Specifically, Netanyahu's government in Israel has represented the Iranian nuclear program as representing, quote, an existential threat to Israel, and suggesting that it was on the brink of weaponizing its nuclear program. Again, almost exclusively international legal scholars would say, no, the right of self-defense only comes into play when you're actually attacked or you're subject to an imminent threat of attack. And that has normally been seen, literally as the tanks are mobilizing on the border, the bombs are being uploaded on the missiles and the planes. And the fact that you project down the road some capability that could eventually be turned into a weapon against you does not meet that standard. So I think we have to note that the justifications, I say, have been deficient in terms of the normal interpretation of international law and the restraints. It's unfortunate, indeed, I would say tragic, that there has been a problem about between the international community and Iran concerning their nuclear program. Iran, of course, claims it has only interest in peaceful uses of nuclear energy. It has its highest theocratic leader has had a fatwa saying nuclear weapons are immoral and should not be possessed. And even external and adversarial intelligence agencies in their assessments, I'm thinking here of the United States, said that Iran ceased its active nuclear weapon program back in 2003 and has not revived it. What it has had a problem with is meeting all the requirements under its international safeguards regime that the IAEA supervises, and I would attribute that in some ways to trying to hedge its bets going forward. But we had a comprehensive diplomatic solution to the problem, if you will, of Iran and its nuclear program back in 2015 with the so-called JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which had some of the most intrusive verification measures ever promulgated in an arms control agreement, and would, I think, have been a great solution going forward to non-proliferation concerns revolving around Iran. And it was being complied with. No one suggested that it was any of the parties to that agreement were in non-compliance with it. And yet we had Donald Trump in a fit, I think, of spite and arrogance, pulling out of that accord in 2018 and boasting, of course, that he would get a bigger and better agreement out of Iran, which he has not been able to achieve. And now he's been complicit, really, in an act of aggression against Iran. And we will have to see what comes forward in terms of a response. I mean, the Iranian deputy foreign minister the other day said, well, we can't renew negotiations with the United States if we're still under a threat of further acts of aggression by them. Trump musing today that he's not really interested in re-engaging. So all of that on the bilateral track is diplomatically is not being actively followed. And I think the reality is that the Iranians have the capabilities. Let's face it, this is 1940s technology to build a bomb if they put their minds to it. And I think they could, in a matter of months, as
Iranians don't want a bomb. Iranians are held hostage by a gender apartheid regime who wants a bomb.
Well, I'm welcome your
Iranians don't
thoughts on
want
this because
nuclear
one of
weapons capabilities.
can I finish, please?
Yeah, I just want to, it's just that there's an illusion that Iran wants nuclear weapons capability, but Iran is held hostage by a gender apartheid regime that wants nuclear weapons capability. So if we stop recognizing this regime and start talking to the people who represent the nation, this conversation wouldn't even be relevant right now.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate the point about the legitimacy of the regime. Unfortunately, we live in a world where sovereign states are.
Everything I'm saying is very pragmatic. This is not a sovereign state. This is a regime that hijacked. The Iranian people never had free and fair elections. This is not a sovereign state. So I understand what you're saying. You're looking at it through a colonial framework that you only accept what the UN accepts. What I'm trying to say is that the regime is only valid in your eyes and in your discourse because your governments accept it, not because the people in Iran accept it. And the people, when you talk this way, you're helping suffocate the people of Iran and you're erasing their voices.
Okay.
No,
What I'm
I
trying to tell,
disagree with that.
it's very pragmatic. It's extremely pragmatic,
Hold on.
such as it was in apartheid South Africa, to just simply stop recognizing the regime and start forging relations with the leaders who stand for universal human rights. That's extremely
Miriam,
pragmatic.
Miriam, hold it.
Yeah.
He
Well, look at I think there's been a
hold
response. I mean,
I
It's a
want
false narrative.
from
I'm
Canada's
sorry.
perspective, we haven't had diplomatic relations with Iran since 2012.
They didn't have
And
diplomatic
we,
relations with the regime in Iran, and the Iranian Canadian community is very supportive of the Canadian government cutting relations with the Islamic Republic gender apartheid regime occupying Iran.
and
it's
I would say
Mr.
there's also a lot of human rights related action,
The regime in Iran
sanctions
is
and
holding the
censoring.
country hostage with a gender apartheid system. It does not get worse than that. So the
Yeah, but
thing
then
is, the Canadian government is supposed to uphold universal human rights values. That is the reason why they had to cut relations. And when Justin Trudeau became prime minister, the reason why he could not reestablish relations is because the Iranian Canadian community made it very clear that peace is not possible without safeguarding access to universal human rights.
Okay, now
what do you think the
I
Iranian
want
people
to
are in a
know.
position now to change the regime?
Yeah, the Iranian people have civil society leaders such as Nargis Mohammadi, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work. Nargis Mohammadi is calling on free and fair elections. They literally just released a statement calling for no war with Iran, and in that statement, they pleaded with the Western governments to stop recognizing this regime that has hegemonic ambitions, that does have nuclear weapons capability and ambitions, and to start forging relations with the civil society leaders. They already know who they are. My work and the work of many other Iranian advocates have been working very hard to say, hey, stop talking to the regime, start talking with the people. But we can't get there for as long as academia is grouping the people with the regime. And the solution for peace in Israel and Palestine is it's really simple. One state solution that respects the universal human rights of every single person. But we can't do that when Palestinians are seen as animals. And we can't bring peace to the Middle East when Iranians are put in the same category as a tyrannical regime that does have expansionist ambitions. So we can't do that. Iranians are peace-loving people. They want to join the international community. The
Miriam,
JCPOA was one of the
stop.
greatest scandals in.
I'm muting you because you're not stopping. I'm chairing the meeting, so everybody has to listen to me, and I'm going to cut you off. I want everybody to understand that what we have here is a case of the blind man and the elephant. I said I wanted us to have a conversation about peace in the Middle East. You understand that peace in the Middle East has many different meanings. For Mayor, the problem is the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians, the Arab states in the region. For Paul, the problem is the question of nuclear weapons and which states have them and what to do about it. For Mariam, the problem has to do with the legitimacy of the regime. These are three totally of the Iranian regime before, and the recommendations that you propose are all going to be entirely different because you're focusing on different problems with different solutions. You're not going to change each other's focus. If you want to talk about this, you're going to have to stop fighting about which perspective to take. I want you to each talk about what you would do within your own framework. Miriam, I clearly understand from your point of view that the gender apartheid issue has to be handled before you can handle either the solution to the relation between Israel and the Arab states or the concern that Paul is articulating, the question of whether Israel or Iran gets a nuclear weapon. I understand, for you that's priority. Don't try to convince Paul that he has to give his priority up, and don't try to convince Mayor, because you've got different issues, that we're talking about three different issues, and I suggest that we approach them within two different, three different perspectives. Each of you give your own solution without trying to attack the other's point of view. Got it? That's the rule of the game. Suddenly, I've just created it.
Structural truth is not a matter of opinion, and me correcting an illusion and saying the people of Iran are not the regime is not an opinion. And if you're going to treat it as an opinion, you're helping basically erase humanity. And if you're going to do that, we can't have a proper discourse. It's not possible to do that. If you're going to treat universal human rights as an opinion, when it's the very foundation of structural truth, you can't have any truthful conversation rooted in reality without separating regimes that are depriving their nations of the right to choose and speak for themselves, like you did right now by muting me.
Your point of view, that's fine. That's fine. I'm glad you said it.
I think that you guys would have you know what I think? I think you guys will have a much more constructive status quo aligned conversation without someone who operates outside this framework. You guys are not working for peace. You're perpetuating the cycles of violence. And unless you want to have a new conversation with a new path forward, people like me are never going to join the conversation. You're only having me here because Olivia Ward recommended me. Otherwise, I would never even make it into a room like this. But Olivia understands where I'm coming from because she understands that I really, truly understand the issue.
Okay, enough. You've had your say. That's fine. I'm glad you said it. Now, there are other speakers. We have three different issues that we're addressing. Mayor, it's your turn. You have this is your opportunity to talk about your perspective on what needs to be done to create peace in the Middle East, which is a very generic concept. It's apparently broad enough to take care of a whole bunch of different issues. So the floor is yours, Mayor.
Well, uh, uh, she left, so it's okay. She's not any more part of the conversation, which is fine. But I would like to hear Jill because she did not have a chance to speak. And let's have our own conversation. I'm not here to be lectured by a person who has one idea, one claim for truth, and to dominate everything. But let's forget about it. I would like to hear Jill, if it's possible.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. My interest that you have sparked today in this conversation is that in spite of what what you said, Paul, in terms of the violation of international law, Article 2, Article 51, with the recent attack on Iran, it seems to me that we are going to have to remedy this. This is a very, very serious problem when the laws get thrown out, because maybe this time in terms of Israel and the U.S., maybe next time China or North Korea or another power. So I think I'm deeply concerned about the UN being re-empowered to be seen as the guardian or not being delegitimized through these processes. But I have to also say, and in light of what you've said, Meir, and even our Maryam Nayab Yazdi, is that somehow we need to go to diplomacy. We need not just to use military force, but somehow we are in a position where we're not able to gain a sense of making Israelis feel safe, which is extremely important. I mean, because if Israel cannot feel safe at this moment in time. Forget the history of how Israel evolved, but if they cannot feel safe, they're going to exaggerate their response of self defense. And so my concern is, how do we also, on the one hand, create a sense of safety, but on the other hand, help Israelis to see that a ceasefire is absolutely vital to to world peace or any kind of peace in the Middle East, because what is invariably happening is that people are lining up and on the Gaza side because of the because of the reality of seeing death and and very unfair food weaponization of humanitarian aid. And slowly, Israel is going to become a pariah state, which is then going to lead to greater problems. So I just wanted to ask, how do we, on the one hand, give Israel a sense of safety and allow Israel to be reined in a little bit, not just by the US, but by the international community? How do we also strengthen international law not to lose its legitimacy and not to have a voice? This multilateral voice is so crucial to also continue to help bring peace to the Middle East, whether it's through the Abraham agreements or not. So I just wanted to throw that out, these concerns.
I think probably Paul's turn.
Well, I mean, I don't have much to add. I sort of empathize with those concerns. Obviously, international law and respect for it is going through a rather rough patch, to put it mildly. I would also note, I know it's outside of our immediate region, but the Russian aggression against Ukraine was a real blow to that, in part because it also showed up the structural vulnerability of the UN system, with the 5 permanent members enjoying a prerogative of veto that is being abused, and that has itself discredited the Security Council and the system to some extent, and that I think we have to realistically acknowledge. It has paralyzed, some of the issues where it's indeed would be requisite for the Council, with its responsibilities to maintain international peace and security under the Charter, to be active, and they haven't been. So we're part of a broader problem in terms of eroding norms, or perhaps better to say, eroding respect for norms that have been accepted and freely entered into. And though we weren't able to get into it, I would note that when we talk about international human rights law, I mean, these are all agreements that have been voluntarily entered into by the states concerned. So they are a legitimate reference point when states violate these obligations or norms because they have accepted them. And it is a world where we need to reaffirm the validity of these. And that, is difficult at a period when there's this great power rivalry, because often we look to the most influential states to be the most supportive of the international order, but this clearly not happening. And to my regret, I think middle powers and other potentially influential states have been overly cautious about speaking out on these patterns of misbehavior. And I would welcome more activity there. But as I sometimes say to my students, is No, you don't throw out the criminal code of Canada just because there continues to be crimes committed. And similarly, I would apply that at the international level as well.
Okay, it looks to me like the lady who left was obviously incensed because we did not prioritize her solution or her implied solution, which was that you have to think about human rights. And probably she didn't exactly say it, but it certainly means a regime change. And that obviously, in my opinion, a regime change would help solve the problem, but you do not find anybody, even, for example, the US, which is doing its best to destroy the regime's weaponry or potential weaponry. You don't find even the U.S. calling for a regime change. Now, I guess that's the question. Is there any hope or any reason to believe that taking such an approach would be have any promise whatever that before you solve the problem of the bunker bombs and the the underground facilities for making enrichment. Uh, Before you solve problems like that, you have to do a regime change, or that's the way to go. That you do that first. I don't think so, but if anybody here believes that that is the most reasonable step to take at this point, speak up because it's a possible solution, and she had her point of view, and maybe there are other people who agree with her. The other thing is, of course, we're leaving out Gaza altogether now. The whole conversation about Gaza and Iran are, in a way, treated as if they were completely separate issues. And if we're talking about changing a regime, I would start with changing the Israeli regime because that would handle both the Gaza problem and the Iranian problem. Tell me whether you think I'm a crackpot on that, Mayor.
Well, listen, although I respect what the lady who had left us said, I think that it is on the verge or on the border of romanticism of politics and not so much of politics. Although I agree that if we could hear and we could have reached the voice of people directly and ask them to create politics anywhere in the world, it would have been a better solution. But the reality is that, the Ayatollah regime came after a revolution in Iran, and that's what the people wanted, and that's what they have, and those people are not going to let go of although they do not represent the Iranian people, they are the government. Anyway, in Israel too, it's the same thing. So let's speak a little bit about more on concrete terms of what can be done in Israel and Palestine. At least this is my area, this is my territory. I can speak a little bit with confidence on that. Of course, we need a regime change in Israel. We need a change of regime that would say that peace is a possible option. And we don't have that. We don't have a regime in Israel that says peace solution is something that we should aspire to and try to achieve. We don't have that. But the real problem is that we don't have it on the other side too, especially if we are speaking about Hamas. And that's what I was saying, that the rejection fronts are, they mutually reinforce each other to some extent. And we need to change the tone of who we hear from both societies. There are Israeli Jews and there are Israeli Palestinians who are speaking for peace. There are Palestinians who are speaking for peace. There are people who are saying, listen, the war that we have experienced now is clearly not a solution to anything. What Israel has been doing in the last 18 months is verges on genocidal acts, if not a genocide per se. And it's true, Jill, that we need to create some kind of safety net. The Jews would feel in Israel that they can trust the other side. But this is not for the other side to build, it is a mutual recognition of each side of the other side. And we need to work on that. Now, we are a minority in Israel today. The people who are speaking about peace as a possibility is a tiny minority. Most Israeli Jews don't think that there is any space to speak with Arabs, forget Palestinians, on peace terms. And that's the situation, and that's the danger that we are in. Because if we experience now 18 months of a terrible war, we can go further in that direction to a much more severe and problematic situation. Pariah state would be the least of our problem if we will go on rejecting the possibility of peace.
And how do you expect to get there, dear?
Well, I think that as far as Israelis are concerned, we are creating as much objection to the Israeli government, the current government. We are resisting, we are protesting, we are writing, we are demonstrating, we are doing everything in our ability. I recommend refusal to serve in the Israeli army. Most Israelis don't accept my solution. I think that refusal is a democratic act by responsible citizens when they think that the government is doing illegal action. They must resist and do not participate in those illegal action. And to a large extent, the occupation of the Palestinians is an illegal action. Israel is declaring a war. It's a kind of a war that they are not forced into, but they are making that war as a possibility and as their first choice. So it is a war of choice, and war of choice cannot be justified. And that's what the Israeli government is doing for the last 58 years in the occupied territories. We are doing a war of choice, and people have let go of any possible peaceful solution. A peaceful solution would mean a compromise between the Israeli Jewish people and the Palestinian people. The rejection front on both sides does not accept a peaceful solution. That's where we are now. That's the situation. The only thing that I can say is that we need to keep on our resistance. Now, if people would do what the young lady has done, that is claim that Israel and the Israeli Jews are the bad guys, and as bad guys should not even listen to them, what they have to say, this is a wrong political step. I think that what we should be doing is promoting and helping and assisting Israeli resistance front against the government and doing many more actions toward showing that peace is a possibility.
We have had three different issues that we're addressing: the Iranian-Israeli situation, the bomb, the legitimacy of the Iranian government, and the way of restricting the development of nuclear weapons in that country. And then the problem of the Palestinians and the Gazas. Everybody agrees, apparently, that the problem is the governments of all sides. If we could get the governments of Iran, the government of Israel, and the Gazan or the Palestinian Authority, which isn't really the Gazan Authority, but the Hamas, to if we could change them and their attitudes and their policies. It's only by giving voice to the people themselves, the people, as opposed to their own governments, that we see any progress. Okay, so we're not.
Well, but Meta, the Gazans had voted for the Hamas in 2006 and 2007 with large numbers. So that's the only time and the only point in time in which there were elections. In Israel, the government is a legitimate government. It has a majority. So if we accept democracy, we have to accept democracy and the results of what people are saying, right? So we have a right-wing government because most of the Israelis support a right-wing government. And that's exactly what the Palestinians have done in the Gaza Strip. They supported a Hamas government.
Right? So there's no likelihood that the uprising from dissident people, people who are in opposition to the government, will make any difference in any of these three cases. Therefore, the only thing remaining is there any possibility that the international community, through the UN or any other potential organization, could have any impact where the people against their governments will not solve the problem, and that's Paul's bailiwick. Paul, if nobody else can fix this, can you, as a diplomat?
No, I mean, that's Maya made an important point. I mean, there's still democracy. I mean, Israel, the people elected representatives in free and fair elections, and it so happens that there's a right-wing dimension to this. And Netanyahu, for some ways, for his own personal interests, has also perpetuated that and brought in more extremist ministers into his coalition. That does not apply to Iran. Miriam was right. There aren't free and fair elections there, and I don't think there's much prospect for them. But we have to avoid, simplistic approaches. I mean, this notion even talking about the people of Iran. It's not like it's a monolith. There's a variety of factions,
Absolutely,
attitudes. So it's much more complex. And how do you really know who are the genuine spokespeople for the popular will? And in terms of international community, unless you are authorizing interventions, military interventions to overthrow those regimes, that, my suggestion, is not the preferred approach to dealing with those very problematic regimes that exist in this world. A two-state solution remains, I think, necessary between Palestine and Israel. Most of the international community continues to promote it. But obviously, in the end, it has to be a realization of the people concerned that their future security and prosperity is better served by coming to some sort of compromise under that rubric than continuing to have perpetual war between them.
I think, Paul, the problem is that no one really believes that the two-state solution can work. I mean, it is a dream that just doesn't seem possible. I mean, the occupied West Bank had 7,500 settlers in 1995. It has over 750,000 or more in 2025. It's being slowly occupied. I work on land rights in India. I know about land grabs. It's been a very effective land grab because Israel wants more territory, and this is what they're gearing for. So, I think I think most of the problem that we have is we don't know what we're batting for. A two-state doesn't look possible, but a one-state, we can't see the Palestinians getting equal rights under Israeli government because there's been such an apartheid regime. So I think a lot of the problem that we suffer from internationally is we don't know what the long game is. So, how do we support? I mean, of course, we'd like a ceasefire, we'd like humanitarian aid, we'd like peace in the form of a ceasefire. But in terms of the long game, what are we batting for?
Mm. This has been the most dispiriting conversation. I knew it wasn't going to be fun, but it hasn't led anywhere, has it? We are absolutely not facing any, nobody's come up with a good one, a good proposal. And if you have one, for heaven's sake, put it out here right now because we're coming to the end of our hour. And I don't know.
That's why I said when you asked me before, I said that in Israel many people are depressed because they are realizing the depth of the the tragedy that we are caught in, both for us and for Palestinians, and there is no clear realization of what can be done in order to promote a less violent, a less vile solution. And those are the problems that we are faced with. And to come and say, well, one state and human rights for everybody, but Palestinians don't accept the human rights of Jews, and Jews do not accept the human rights of Palestinians. And we are back at square one because we cannot create enough people who would believe in a system that will that will be trustful by both sides or so many other sides. So we are in a very problematic situation. That's what I said, that the consequences of the war brings people to a realization that the war promises only one thing: mutual destruction. That's the only realization that I can say. But I don't think that many people realize that those are the direct consequences of what we've been doing in the last 80 years. We get into a terrible situation in which we have no good way to solve.
Well, all I can think of is I don't think that the the governments or the people in the region are going to come up with any solution. And I don't believe that the UN can. But if I were going to make any bets of what to do, I think I'd put my money on trying to get some center of coherence in policies within the international community so that some kind of international law could be promulgated and enforced and enforcement is a pretty heavy language for it, but applied anyway, brought with a with an intervention international intervention of some kind, like peacekeepers. I don't know what it would look like, but Paul, is there any possibility through the international community to say you guys can't solve this, so we're going to tell you what the solution is, and here's what you're going to do?
Now, you can't impose a solution. You couldn't get the backing for that. It has to come out of the parties.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe, I'm a perennial optimist as a diplomat. I would note that there have been diplomatic successes in the past dealing with parts of the problem, the Middle East. And they have, we had a remarkable peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. We've had similar with Jordan. We had, and also to Joe's point about settlements, yeah, well, there were also settlements in the Sinai. There were Jewish settlements in Gaza. But at that time, the government, as part of an effort to come to a better situation, intervened and removed them. And I think that can be done again. It's always out there. Ultimately, 58 years of occupation is frankly a poison within Israeli democracy. And eventually, I think people will recognize that they have to purge that and end that state. And this will ultimately mean recognition of coexistence with the two states that will be there.
So,
Anyway,
Meta,
that's
I just have a solution, Paul, just before you go.
yeah.
Since we want to leave on somewhat of a better note, and because Meyer is living in Israel, I feel some compulsion to leave him on a better note. Is that part of the problem? And Paul, you've seen this. Part of the problem is that we always recognize violent state actors instead of nonviolent state actors. And as I recall, in Palestine, there was years and years of people practicing nonviolence. There were many people that Vivian Silver, Canadian Israeli, who was working from, Israel to bring peace with Arab women. There was many things, but these were never supported and reinforced also by the international community and also by the UN, which I think is a big mistake, which is why I think Maryam Nayab Yazdi had a very significant point, is that if we're always going to keep the focus on the violent state actors and not see where there's hope. I mean, mothers in Israel watching their sons come back from the IDF tour of duty must be so saddened by the trauma that they're living. I mean, this is terrible. This is going to create an Israeli society that is terrible. So I'm sure in the mothers' hearts in Israel, they don't want to see this ongoing. The need is, and I think the solution is for us to really try to identify where there is positive upturn and really support it. And often that is female actors, which is where the idea of gender apartheid in Iran made sense to me in the earlier segment. So let us hope that we can, in our own small ways, draw attention to the nonviolent actions that are still going on amid all of this carnage and violence. And let's build on it. And may the UN also build on it. Thanks.
I can take anything from this to heart, of admonition of what I should do. Okay, I'll give more attention to nonviolence in Israel and in Iran as well. And God knows, I suppose, in Gaza, although I don't know about that, whether it exists. Are we through? Does anybody have anything to add to this?
I just want to say to Jill, thank you very much for what you just said. This is exactly what I think should be done, even in terms of international community, to see that there are always forces or segments or communities within the Israeli Jewish society and within the Israeli Palestinian society and within Palestinian communities that do support peace and do try to build on whatever we have, even meager successes until now. But we do have some. So, to some extent, Miriam was right that we need to look for those people in Iran too. But to romanticize that the way she did would be wrong. We don't need to romanticize peaceful forces in Israel. We need to help them to find a way, but the resistance is very strong and the government acts against it. So those are the issues that we have to face.
But 4,000 people came to Egypt to walk to the Rafah border. I mean, that is amazing. 4,000 people.
Absolutely.
I mean, we should
Absolutely.
glorify that. Why are we not glorifying those small, meager things? They're not going to do a regime change that Meta's looking at, but there'll be incremental efforts that changes public opinion. And I think it's really too
Gilles, I agree with you completely. That's why I recommend heart, warmly, and in any way and possible manner that refusal is a democratic, non-violent action
Yes.
toward indicating that peace is possible. That's exactly what I'm doing. This is exactly what I'm speaking about to as many people as I can, anywhere I can, every day, every time I have a chance.
We need another forum, Meta, with Amor. Keep.
I'm afraid I have to excuse myself now, but all
I
the
know,
best
but
to
you
the
have the
speakers.
last word, Paul. If you have,
Well, it's not a last word. I've given my input into it, and obviously, as you know, that there were three really separate topics here. Maybe each one, merited a look at in a separate forum. It's hard, obviously, to do justice. Everything ranging from nuclear non-proliferation to the future of a two-state solution. So anyway, carry on. All good to meet
guys.
you
Thank you, Paul. Thank
virtually.
you, Amor. Thank you,
Bye.
Meta.
Thank you, Meta, and thank you, Gilles.
Bye bye.